Hey everybody in crypto land, this is Alex Wykoff, and I'm the Director of Product Web3 at WRST Collabs. I'm with my good friend and colleague Petros, who is a Product Manager at WRST Collabs, and we're going to do a little recap on the NFT NYC event. It was a couple weeks ago. I know everybody else has kind of gotten their recaps out already. Unfortunately, I did get the COVID POAP, and had to be down for the count for a couple of weeks here, but finally recovered and have a chance to come into the studio and kind of talk through things. So I thought first maybe Petros, we'd start with you, and maybe at a high level, like what was the week like as a whole? If you just had to like paint a broad stroke, were you glad that you went? Should we give FOMO to the folks who didn't end up showing up there, or what would you say are some of the high points?
That's a great place to start. I think, first off, I'm definitely glad I went, because you hear the hype about, NFT NYC or just, conferences in general, but until you actually go, you don't realize how valuable it really is. Obviously, there's a lot of cool stuff happening, but the connections you make with people, the companies you meet, you get to have these unexpected experiences and connections that you wouldn't even imagine. So definitely glad I went. FOMO for sure. Like if you haven't gone, it's worth going for sure.
Right on.
Yeah.
I tend to agree. I think that, I've been fortunate enough to go to like Cosmoverse, Solana Breakpoint in Lisbon. I got to speak at ETH Denver, and NFT NYC is a fundamentally different type of event. And I think, yes, there are plenty of cryptocurrency professionals who are there, and they run the whole spectrum. But I think we also saw a really strong kind of like retail and commercial presence that you just typically don't find at the more typical cryptocurrency conferences. And I think that it helped to humanize a lot of the technology, where, a lot of times you're kind of like quite deep in the weeds about governance or zero knowledge proofs or differential privacy or any of these other like really kind of almost arcane topics that you have to kind of level set sometimes and kind of be reminded about, like, well, what's the technology for? Is it technology for technology's sake, or is it technology for enhancing the state of humanity? And I think that NFT NYC is one of the better bridges that are out there for exactly looking at that point of like, where does the technology meet humanity?
That's a very great point, actually. I think you're right, because when we were there, we saw these, yes, of course, the big players in the space, if you will, but we also saw a lot of people, I think, together and individually, that are just passionate about the technology or what Web3 can be, and they were doing these cool things, whether it be a game or a certain random offshoot of some cool idea that they had, but it was visceral, it was personal, and it was a lot of passion in people. You could tell that you can't tell, even though you're like online looking at a cool NFT drop on OpenSea or following their Discord or whatnot. When you're there in person, you're seeing the essence of it. So I think that bringing that humanity is really a great point. I saw a lot of that.
For sure. I think to carry on that point, there's like this question mark that people have had all along about when you're buying NFTs and like, what's the value? And you create a roadmap and there's a website and a Discord, but like, where do these things become real or tangible for folks, right? I think that we struggle a lot with this kind of digitization. Oh my gosh, I can't speak today. Digitization, ephemeralization of our reality, right? And so when things happen online, we still don't necessarily regard them as real in some aspects. And when you get to experience things in real life and in a physical sense, it takes on a whole new meaning. And so I think maybe a few cases, I have, of course, a bunch of kind of props on the table here that are different bits of swag I picked up from different projects, but I'd also like to talk about some of the experienced situations that happened. Cool Cats in particular, right? They had this whole thing where like you had to walk into a building, and then they had a wristband that they gave you, and this was really like a subtle trick of theirs that if you didn't understand it, what they were doing is they were kind of identity pilling you right off the bat. that, you had this, now you had this thing, and if you tapped it onto a treasure chest, it would pop open, but that account that's tied to your identity on the wristband also got credited. Or if you participated in one of the games on the floor, there was one where like the floor is lava, or a different one where like you're on a pirate ship and like you're like shooting cannons and stuff. If you participate in those games, you get rewarded. So your participation in a physical space turned into digital rewards. And then what's even more bonkers is then you could then turn around and take those digital rewards and then buy physical objects. So you could get like a pair of socks or a hat or a slice of pizza or, all of these different things. But what they did was they took the complexity of the digital identity and the thing that trips everybody up, which is like, playing around with MetaMask or any of the other, cryptocurrency wallets that are on your phone, and just turned it into a neat little wristband that you could just bounce against things. And that would allow for your participation in this space. It allowed you to build reputation and then trade on your reputation. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant.
That's actually very amazing, because I actually didn't get to attend that particular event with you, which I kind of regret, because I wish I'd been able to go, because that's amazing. But to that point, I want to push on that a little bit more, because I know that even myself, I always struggle with this whole like value of digitalized, not just identity, but also ownership, or just digitalized interactions, and what does that really mean? And what they've done there is, I think, a beautiful experiment, an embodiment of what that technology is and can be. And it's an early stage experiment that you can imagine how that could be then scaled up to your daily life, right? You're going to Whole Foods, right? You're an Amazon Prime member, you're going to Whole Foods, and now your interactions at Whole Foods, you can just sort of have that connected with your online Amazon account. Just a simple example. You can apply that across anything. And that's beautiful, because oftentimes I hear people saying, well, NFTs are just a simple JPEG. Obviously, everyone knows that. It's sort of silly and brush off of this technology. And I tell them, like, this is all an experiment. This is the early stages of the experiment that we're trying to see what the technology can do. And I think they did a beautiful job of that. That's a great experiment that I feel like is super valuable.
Yeah, I think that their execution was 100% on point. And the thing is that whole experiment would not have existed if not people had purchased those JPEGs early exactly. on, and kind of been willing to take a risk, right? And so they provided liquidity to the project to execute. And of course, there was, I think, a pretty good amount of sponsorship that was by Shopify. Somebody out there can correct me if I'm wrong. But nonetheless, they were able to do really well there. The one other thing that they had going on there was with Rally, and I'll try and grab one of my props. So inside of the Cool Cat space, they also had some work with Rally. So they have this fancy little QR code, and so if you worked with Rally, you could actually have fractional ownership of physical goods. Wow. And this was all kind of represented, through NFTs. What was really fascinating is that it is kind of like breaking up the idea of ownership and allowing for a lot more people to participate in the ownership of an object. In that case, it was some custom one-of-one hand drawings. And I think that was really like a cool thing to see. And then I happened to see that idea replicated in a few other times. And one of the other times is actually with this super fancy polo shirt, which I haven't taken out of the cloth bag yet. But this is a group that's called Omni Horse. And they allow you to like have fractional ownership over a horse that races, like a living, breathing animal.
That is super cool.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, and so you're kind of seeing a few different cases of these folks who are looking at what are these things that could exist outside of our general ability. I can't afford a pony, and I work a really good job here at WRST Collabs. But the thing is that it allows you to have access to these things you wouldn't otherwise have access to, right? And to participate in these spaces, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg, right?
That's I'm glad that you brought that up, because when I was first going down the rabbit hole of Web3 and NFTs, because obviously, like everybody else, I've heard of it. I have friends who are into it, whatever. I was always just like, I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I started to go down that rabbit hole and started working at WRST Collabs, shout out again. No, it really hit me when I understood the true, I guess, democratization of ownership, or just true value of ownership,
Mm-hmm.
and how you can obtain things that you could never really obtain otherwise
Mm-hmm.
with this technology. And a lot of these people are doing some really good use cases with like this, racehorse ownership. And there's a lot of other examples. So that is something that I think the mass population hasn't yet realized the value of yet, because
Mm-hmm.
they haven't thought beyond the sort of the superficial of it. So that's a very good point that you brought up. I agree that was one of the first things that hit me as I was kind of proceeding beyond the superficial of this space and going down the rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
And once that really clicks with the general population, I think that there's going to be an even broader adoption than we've already seen with this market.
No, 100%. And I think, what I appreciated about Cool Cats is that they were able to reduce the complexity around digital identity and kind of like take the hard part of using a wallet away.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised at all to see that happen more frequently as we push into the consumer space, where there are going to be different opportunities that you can participate in fractional ownership, for example, maybe even have a way to do like fiat entry, but you're not going to have all of the complexity of the private, key phrase until you reach a certain threshold, right? There was one other wallet company that was there that I want to think it was literally called the Magic Wallet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they worked in a similar way. It's kind of like if you operate below a certain threshold, then it's more like a passphrase or username and password. And once you get above a certain threshold, that's when you need to like KYC in and do all the rest of the fun, complex things that we all deal with.
That's interesting, because I think there's a whole trend going on, whether all these individual companies or groups realize it or not, because I met a gaming company called Hooligan, My Hooligan.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really cool game. I loved the game itself. I got to play it while I was there, and I got to talk to one of the product folks while I was there. But the concept was the same, where they had, and I'll keep the model brief, but they had a sort of non-wallet requirement to start playing and
Mm-hmm.
building your character, and you can sort of build up and level up, if you will. But once you hit a certain threshold, you have to sort of become sort of a wallet connected user to be able to then have that ownership and then sort of participate in value exchange and
Yep.
things of that nature. But it allows you to engage with and do these actions and activities without having to go through the complexity and learning curve, because at that point you may not get it, or you may not see enough value to even worry about learning it or
Mm-hmm.
figuring it out. But when you've invested, right, there's an investment phase. When you've invested so much, then you hit this threshold, you're like, well, okay, it shouldn't be too hard to do this next step. You're lowering this sort of activation energy, if you will,
Yeah.
to participate. And now they do that, and then they get exposed to this whole other world with even more value
Mm-hmm.
than they've had. So that sort of entry-level free or lack of wallet need to get you hooked, for lack of a better word, or at least interested, I think it is a key to that sort of broader user adoption. I see a lot of companies doing that. I noticed, and I'm glad that you saw that too, because I felt like it was a trend, and it feels like
Mm-hmm.
that's what's going on.
Oh, for sure. And, it's not anything particularly new. I think we've seen exactly that model with World of Warcraft, right? Free to play up until like level 20 or so, right? And then if you want to continue on, then you have to like buy into the subscription.
Right.
And so I think that we're applying tried and tested models, but just having this like layer of complexity underneath it, in not revealing that complexity until like you said, they've kind of like crossed that investment threshold of their personal time and energy. So it allows them to like feel some of the value and feel what that experience is going to be like, and then hit them with the hard part, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably much more appropriate versus Axie would be a great one to point a finger at, where you had to buy in on these NFTs before you could play the game, right? And I think we'll see that more and more, where they'll just be like, here, come participate in our space, see what we're about. And only after you've received a certain amount of experience with the system and find it to your liking, then you make that, that next step toward investment.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about a few other IRL experiences before we necessarily dive into like the rest of the merch and whatnot on the table here. So, I think that for sure you went to Ape Fest at least once.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't make it, but I'd heard and seen photos. And so I was curious, I don't think you can talk about NFT NYC this year in particular without talking about Ape Fest a little bit. So I'd love to hear about your take on it. What did it, obviously it was entertaining, of course, but also what did it mean?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of utility and meaning behind or beyond just entertainment. I want to also bring one point back to the topic we were talking about originally, because it ties into this, is the FOMO of not attending these things, and also what it means to attend these events and meet people. The reason I got to go to Ape Fest is not because I'm a holder, but because I randomly met somebody at one of the other side events that we were waiting in the bathroom line. We just started talking, and there's a community feel with people in Web3 or sort of the NFT space in general, and obviously specifically within projects for sure, but just the field in general, and got to know them. And then it turns out, I guess they were part of another project that you're part of, the Rare Pizzas Mafia. But I got to go because I met this guy randomly at the show, and we had a shared interest.
Yep, this is our little Rare Pizzas guy. So yes, if you haven't seen the Rare Pizzas NFT project, I'll be glad to talk about that later. But that was Gary Palmer Jr., right?
Gary Palmer Jr., shout out. Yeah. You are the best. Honestly, a very nice gentleman. So the reason I got to go is because I met somebody with a similar interest. We got to talking, and there was an invite, and I went. But so that's really part of the value of this community beyond just all the other things. So the event itself, I think, had a lot of meaning, because you got to really experience one of the sort of the outcomes at its peak of what this industry, this space can do. You had people that were your average Joe, and I'm sure there were people that were like super wealthy or whatever, but they were all part of the same community. They had the same ownership of something, and they were sharing a shared experience and a shared value that only they could share because they were part of this community. And the in real life experience had obviously free food, free drinks, but also like cool little side things where you got to get some great merch only at the show. We got to see Timberland drop a really cool music video using his Bored Ape. So there's so much value. Like you can't buy a concert ticket to go see Timberland perform to drop his brand new music video, or tell you about a sneak peek of what he has coming in the future, in the metaverse and all these things. So there's a lot of value, a lot of meaning beyond just a cool picture that's worth a lot of money, but it's also community experience, and it's something that's not accessible outside of you wanting to participate in this community, which pushes sort of decentralization and ownership and sort of community, I think. To stop using that word so much, but that's kind of what I experienced at Ape Fest, beyond the super fun.
Yeah. I think it's really, you use the word quite a bit, but it's actually quite important, is this word of community, right? Because a lot of projects throw it out there, especially when they're doing their mint. And a lot of times it's this situation where it's a incentivized participation in a Discord up to the mint, or up to at least getting included in the allow list, and then it kind of becomes a ghost town quickly thereafter, right? Or there's just like really awkward participation after the fact. People worried about pumping their bags and all this stuff. And I think that you experienced a different aspect about this, which is what happens when community manifests in reality. And I was lucky enough, I caught another piece of that, but from a different angle. So I got two different things to hold up and kind of show off. So I happen to have found somebody two different people at two different times who were into the Illuminati NFT project. It's run by Truth Labs. And because of that, one of them in particular, he's like I want to think CEO of Meta Moves, and he does a motion capture studio to like get people's like professional dancers moves and then use that on virtual avatars, and, like sell those as NFTs. That's what he's working towards. He hooked me up with a ticket to get into the Illuminati event, and it was really fantastic. He, it was just out of the goodness of his heart, he hooked me up, and because of that, I was able to get in. And for them, their like integration point with technology was actually a bit more simple. So if you were in line, you needed to use the token proof app, which scans your wallet for the possession of an NFT and then provides a QR code, which can then be scanned by the folks at the door. Mm-hmm. And the QR codes are relatively easy to scan, relatively low tech, right? But then afterwards, you're kind of in the event and doing the thing. And so for the Illuminati in particular, it was this really immersive theater experience. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why I appreciated it quite as much as I did, is that they kept technology in its place, which was that it facilitated one particular action, but it didn't dominate the rest of the event, right? I think that's one place where like a lot of technologists maybe get confused or, misdirected, is they kind of feel like technology should be fully immersive around you all the time. And I think that what I really appreciated about what Illuminati did in a different way is they said, yeah, the technology matters, but so does this human experience that you're having, this really aesthetic kind of human experience. And that's why it was really impressive for me. It was like they balanced things in what I felt was like the right way.
That's amazing to see, because I think nothing can replace that in-person human experience, not being distracted by like having a phone in your face or something like that, or
100%.
Other technology being distracting, but focusing on that moment and that experience. I had some friends that are holders, they are holders, and they were able to go as well. And they told me that it was just an out of this world experience that they've never experienced. They mm-hmm. were blown away.
Yeah.
So they shared that same sort of visceral experience with that event, which is great.
Yeah, and it was absolutely wild. I mean, at a different point in time, I was out of the Marriott and saw a dude that had this hat, and it was just like sitting on his lap or whatever, and just mentioned about the Illuminati event and how it was so cool. And he just handed me the hat. And he's like, "Oh wow, I guess you really like it. Here you go." Different point in time, there was another person that hooked me up with an Illuminati pin.
Yeah,
and it's just like, it was just a lot of like give and take, across the board. If there was some way for you to participate and give something good to somebody else, you did it, and they gave back to you. The only other place where I hear about that happening on the regular would be like Burns, whether that's Burning Man or mm-hmm. Flipping Burnside, all these other things, like, or Burning Flipside, or etc. That where there's like more of this kind of exchange, that happens, that's just between people, and is like not there's nothing tokenized about any of that, other than the fact that a community was facilitated around the purchase of the tokens.
It's so funny that you mentioned that, and this is really happened. So I actually went to that Goblin Town party after that event.
Yeah.
And I got in with the two folks that I met there, and we became friends.
Mm-hmm.
And they were handing out the caps, the little
yes.
burger caps.
Yes.
And so I got one, and one of the guys I was with got one, and then they had some people that they knew that couldn't get in.
Yeah.
So when we left the party, we were going to get a Goblin burger, and they knew this guy. They were talking to him. And he's like, "Oh, cool, you got the cap, but I wish I got one." He's like, "Oh, here, you can have this."
Yeah.
And he just gave it to him.
Yep.
And he was just so shocked that, like, you're giving me this?
Yeah.
And so, like, a few moments later, the other guy who was part of a little trio there, it's like, "Oh, man, it's nice you gave it to him." But he's like, "Oh, man, I wish we took it back to our office," because they
mm-hmm.
wanted to sort of. I was like, "Well, I have one. You guys are Goblin holders, and I get to be here. Like, just take it."
Yeah.
And he was like very happy, so he gave me the Illuminati pin. So I got
mm-hmm.
it was this. You're right. It was this selfless sort of exchange of just we're sharing something together. Let's just be happy we're here.
Yeah,
you have it. If that's important to you, take it. And that's a beautiful thing. I think that
mm-hmm.
it harnesses this goodness that I don't want to like get all philosophical, but just I noticed that as well.
Yeah. And it's like I mentioned before, like, in comparison to other technology events or whatnot, that it seemed the relationships between people felt a lot more fluid and less transactional.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that made a fundamental difference in the vibe. That's another word that gets used a lot, right? Vibes. But I think it was also important. It's because it speaks to a hopefulness that people have. And so just for like historical context, in case somebody like watches this video months or years later and doesn't understand the historical context, what we're talking about is an event that occurred in the middle of like a very severe downturn in the cryptocurrency market as a whole.
Yeah.
And so a lot of folks were having their bags absolutely wrecked. And, and a lot of folks are contemplating, do I have to go back to a traditional workforce, or do I have to shut down my project, or any other number of things that they do not wish to do. And yet there was this really hopeful event going on. I think that said, of course, there was a handful of folks that are like, yeah, it's a good event, but they had these kind of slight misgivings about like the money already being committed or something to this effect. And so it's like, oh, of course they're going to push through and do it because they already put the money into the event. But, that didn't stop anybody from having good execution. And it didn't stop anybody from having exactly this kind of like good human experience.
Yeah. Well, also like, and this is not sort of a broader thing. It could have been a sort of micro occurrence, but a lot of the transactions I was looking at, for example, Goblin Town, and their floor price went up by almost like 1.3 ETH after their event. Like, so you saw this sort of people's emotion and sort of passion toward the project being reinforced because they're seeing that value. So yes, the market's crashing, but a lot of people do behave on emotion, and when you reinforce that and you feel more passionate towards something, then you'll double down or risk more or just participate whatever you're doing. So I noticed that the floor price was moving up. So there is some elements in certain areas of people beyond that believing in that space and the technology and the experience and wanting to take part no matter what, because they know it's going to give them something more beyond just the moment of sort of this downturn.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's cool with you, I think I'd like to segue on to like some more table items and kind of like get through them here.
Let's do it.
So first off, Neopets. Like, I don't know how many people are in technology today because they played with Neopets as a kid or as a teenager, or in my case as like a college student, because I'm old. And they actually showed up. So Neopets Meta was there, and I thought that was a really kind of exciting thing. You should have seen it when the table, I think you were actually there, right? Because we got through registration.
Yeah, I was
right
there.
And we raced up to the top of the Marriott, right? That's where the registration booth was.
First in line guys at the show.
100%. Number one, first in line. And you were right in front of Worthhalter in the POAP crew.
We gotta talk about that.
Yeah, we'll totally talk about that in a beat. But yeah, the Neopets table, when that opened up, people lost their freaking minds. Honest to God, like the nostalgia for this brand is intense. And Neopets Meta is like a slight offshoot of the core brand, but it's really fascinating to me, and it gives me a certain kind of hope that if can history repeat itself, or at least rhyme, where if folks by playing with Neopets end up by extension gaining some kind of knowledge or desire to dive in more into crypto, into the whole Web3 experience. I gotta wonder about that. Yeah. So I wanted to bring that up because first of all, who isn't nostalgic about Neopets, but also just thinking about what's that opportunity that's in front of them in terms of getting more generations interested in what's going on in the space. I think that's something that has a whole lot of opportunity to it. So that was one thing that stuck out for me. I was wondering were there any other brands that you saw that really excited you, especially as like we were kind of like opening day and getting through that kind of like first push up the escalators?
Yeah, honestly, the Mutant Cats DAO is my brand. That was like the defining brand for me, or the defining group for me at the show. And the reason is, and I'm glad that you brought that comic book. Yeah. So maybe you want to show that off. Sure. Yeah. So the reason is that just a brief for them. Like when they first launched, there were some issues. I guess the devs that they were working with, someone abandoned the project because of it being overwhelming or something along those lines. And the holders, the community members, the DAO members, took it upon themselves to come together and just revamp it and rebirth the project, because they were so in love with the project, and they had done a lot of great work, and they were doing some fun things. And he talked to me a little bit about their plan. Part of it is just like sort of revising the metadata, which is coming up. But also, I'm a big sneaker person, and they have like these cool sneaker lines coming out.
Yep.
But for me, why it spoke to me, it was the sort of the rising of the ashes, so to speak, because as an entrepreneur previously, like believing in something and coming up where you face a lot of challenges, and really just coming together and pushing through and succeeding because you believe in something, that spoke to me. So I really realized the sort of the value in the project participation in that moment, because it's not just a picture or whatever else the NFT is, right? Even the utility to some degree, it's more of like, does it speak to who you are as a person?
Yeah.
Does it speak to like how you live your life? How does it relate to you, or you know, what does it mean to you? And to me, at that moment, I really realized the true purpose of some of these things and why people get involved. And so I'm a holder now. I bought one off of OpenSea.
Nice.
And so 455. Sorry, I have to shout out my little NFT. I'm excited, but I'm very happy with it. And that was the project to me that stood out. It was my favorite band, and that was the reason why.
Awesome.
They're doing cool things. You guys should check them out.
Yeah, that was really, I think it was just an awesome story. I saw how much you related with them, like when we were on the floor walking around and checking all the different projects out. So yeah, talking about comic books for a beat, there was a whole lot of them that actually came out, and I was really kind of shocked and surprised. The Forgotten Runes Wizard Cult had this super high quality, this is like thick for a comic book, and I say this as somebody who has a pull list at Tribe Comics off of South Lamar. I was really surprised and just really amazed by all of this. I want to get in on the Forgotten Runes Wizard Cult. The floor is too high for me. I'm hoping that they come up with like a Generation 2 or something that lets me get in at a lower price. But like, I was really impressed. They had people dressed up in Times Square, like you were there.
I was there.
Yeah, you were right next to me. And,
you were super excited. You like went to get.
Oh,
it.
I bolted right over to them. I'm like, please, like this is awesome. And what was mind-boggling to me, and like the thing I didn't think about at all until I saw it in live action, was they were handing out comics to like every random person in Times Square, which Times Square is like a really busy place, and folks who have like nothing to do with crypto. And some of them are tourists from like around planet Earth, and like legit, I saw that. Like I saw families that I knew for sure had like just gotten off the plane, and like this is their first or second day in the city. They're checking things out, and like there was this squad of like little kids who all had that comic book, and they're all sitting side by side.
You walked by them,
yeah, and I was just like, what? Like they are gonna have this comic book. They're gonna read it. Hopefully, they take it home. And then they end up getting pilled on crypto because of a comic book. Really crazy. Yeah, Monochrome. This is the exclusive NFT NYC edition of their comic book. That was also good. And then Captain Bitcoin, the Satoshi series.
Nice.
And this one is bagged, carded, and it's got like the certificate of authenticity. I actually got to meet the author, and It was really fantastic. Yeah, Austin Evangelista. He was super kind and hooked me up with this just as he was getting ready to head out for the day. But we got to talking about comic books, talked about pull lists, talked about my kid and how much he likes comic books and art. And so, yeah, just a lot of different people applying creativity. And comics are such a wonderful medium. Scott McCloud has written like a number of great books on this. Understanding comics is like one of the best.
Yeah.
But it allows for you to communicate about really complex topics that can span temporality and technology and help people to understand. So like, for example, Scott McCloud, a reason why I bring him up is he also made the first comic that explained the Google Chrome browser and why that was necessary. Because at the time, people were like, why do I need another browser? Like, we've got Internet Explorer, and that's pretty much good enough. And/or there's like this weird thing called Firefox, right? And so why does Google need to be making a browser? And his comic explained it. It was a web comic, but it was really cool. And I've never forgot about that. And I thought, you know, how sensible is it for folks to be making different comics and explaining their NFT project or explaining the fundamentals of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, etc. I think that it's such a fantastic medium. I was really happy to see just how many different comics there were out there. I grabbed as many as I could and were like reasonable. But I thought that was really fantastic. So amazing. I hope people keep on making comics. Who knows? Maybe that'll be a whole part of Comic-Con in the future will be like that.
I guarantee it'll pick up at some point. I mean, I can't guarantee that, but I guess it will.
Yeah, I think that like Marvel, I gotta believe they're on the cusp of doing this because they already have the digital subscriptions, and that allows you access to the entire archive. Why would they not get in on this on some level? Like I wouldn't expect them necessarily to do PFPs, but I could totally see them do something like an 1155, the same way that they're doing their digital subscriptions now, and then having more connected events in the future, right? Amazing. And then you see the Marvel integrations that are happening at Disney and etc. At what point in time are you going to have that wristband just like the genie that existed, like the genie band at Disney or the band that was at Cool Cats, and then that just becomes part of your Marvel experience, right?
Super amazing.
It'd be wild. So
ample utility there that could be had.
Yeah. So that was comics just got me on like a whole rant. And a whole thought about media and how that gets involved with cryptocurrency. But I just wanted to call that out because there's so many different things that have come out of this that I've seen. Of course, hats and t-shirts, like that's like your typical merch. The other thing, of course, in crypto is like socks.
Oh, yes.
So I've got like the MetaMask socks as well as the Polygon socks. And there was plenty of others, but like socks are also a big thing at these cryptocurrency conferences. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But beyond the clothing, there's also all of these other things that are like showing up, just as merch or as different swag and whatnot, and it keeps me on my toes thinking about, well, what's the next thing that people are going to use to integrate technology and to use as a way of promoting their brand, right?
Yeah.
The other one, do you remember this one?
Yes. Yeah, I have that patch too. It's a great idea.
Yeah, and so why don't we talk about this patch for just a half second?
Sure.
Because I think that this is one of those ones where talking with them, I was like, oh, cool, patches. Thank goodness, because pins and patches are like the one thing I like even better than stickers. We'll talk about sticker game in a second, but like pins and patches are really cool. And this company in particular, maybe you could talk about what the patches are doing.
Sure, yeah. And so the patch has an NFC chip behind it, and essentially you're able to scan your phone or hold your phone close to it, and it unlocks a certain experience or like to a certain page that will. I can't remember exactly the use case for this company, but it gives you access to a particular certain thing that you want to have sort of gated, if you will. Mm-hmm. But they were essentially tying physical to digital in some degree.
That's right,
as I recall it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was one case. Another one was this garage.
Yes.
Right. So this one was a Korean game company. And they were kind of showing off these digital cars that you could race, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And then they had cards that did the same thing, right? That you could scan it and then you could get access to your digital good.
It was like a collectible sort of encased card, and it was really cool. There was one I saw that also did the same thing with hats and a t-shirt or other clothing articles.
Yes.
So there's a lot of application that could be had with that, yeah.
For sure. So that was, the phrase that they were using throughout the event is phygital.
Phygital.
Right? Which is an interesting term. I'm not sure if it really kind of like, if I'm fully on board. But
I like the term. I don't know.
It's all right, right? But there's tons of like really weird or interesting use cases you can think of because the tag on this thing is flexible, it's machine washable. It's quite durable in its use, so you could see it used with clothing, anything that's going to be exposed to the elements, etc., and it should hold up to a certain extent. And I think that we're only kind of on the baby cusp of this thing.
I think like it's a great use case for authentication for brands too. Like if I'm buying a certain object and I want or article of clothing or shoes or whatever, and I want to make sure that it's the authentic one. I didn't buy it from Foot Locker or anything. I just want to make sure it's the authentic one. Like online sales, for example.
Right.
Great way to do that would be to have somehow like a connection to your digital sort of ledger of authenticity, if you will.
Yeah.
to that.
And it reminds me as well about circling back to POAPs and Worthhalter,
Yes.
right? They also had these cards that you can scan with your phone, and then it takes you to the POAP page to show that you met that person in
Yes.
real life, right?
That's right.
And I thought that was awfully clever as well. So there's absolutely just a ton of range when it comes to these concepts and like how to implement them,
Yeah.
right? I thought that it was really cool, this idea that like you can kind of have this authenticity layer to your interactions, that you could say like, no, provably we've met, and this is how we connect. And it's always nice, you spend time with people, you get to know them more and more as you hang out with them in different places and spaces over time. But this is a really great, like when you first meet somebody, how do you keep that relationship in mind?
It's a good memento.
Yeah, it's a good memento. It's a good bit of connection. And so I thought that was really cool. I've got to only wonder like where that's going to end up, right?
Yeah.
Like, are we going to put them in the bottom of shopping bags, and then like as you're putting your shopping bag on like the receiver, like as you're like, imagine you're doing like self-checkout, right? Could you have one of those in your bag and you lay it on there, and then like that's what applies your discount codes and everything else, so that you're not having to like type in your membership ID,
Right.
or who knows how that all works out, right? I mean, do you put it in your luggage, and then as you're like, zipping around through different airports, like does that build up value over time? Who knows?
Yeah. For sure.
So I think the other thing I like about it too is that it allows us to disambiguate the aspects of identity. So what I mean by that very specifically is, if you ever listen to like the founder of Disco XYZ, she does a great articulation of this, and I'm going to steal it exactly for this talk, which is that your identity is an identifier plus activity. And so the identifier might be something like Petros, or it might be something like Alex, or it might be something like an email address or a phone number, right? And then the activity is what you do with it, right? So I have, for example, my name on Twitter, and then that's my identifier, but then my identity is all the posts and interactions that I do with that identifier, right?
Right.
I got to wonder if there's, something else where we can kind of separate this idea a little bit, and instead of worrying about the identifier being something that ties quite so closely to a person like their ID, right, or something that names them explicitly, and rather gets tied to an object, right? So what if through the course of swiping this particular patch at different events and activities over time, the identity gets tied to the patch, but then it's portable, and I could just as easily hand that patch off to you, and it confers all the benefits onto you, right? So that, or all the like the negative effects too. But the idea is that maybe there's a way to accumulate benefit and accumulate reputation, and have it tied to a physical good, and then to exchange that. And it reminds me a lot of Ultima Online, which was one of the first cases where people were buying and selling digital identities, which were their player characters, right? The same thing happened with the Diablo franchise over and over again, where people would like max level the characters and then go and sell them on an open market. I gotta believe that same thing's going to happen in Web3. It's just, it may be more tied to physical goods like this.
Right. Yeah, so it's a transferable identity. It becomes its own entity, if you will, and that has its own activities tied to that.
That's right.
And it's defined, by that. That's a very interesting point.
That's right. I mean, it's in the novel, the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, right? That would be like another case of a physical good that like then moved between this group of friends, and it carried a form of identity with it, right? Yeah. And then this group of people actually identified themselves via their sharing of this object, right? It's not every day you get to bring up like teen fantasy novels in the course of talking about Web3. I think one or two other things I'd love to bring up is the like Korean presence.
Yes.
So there was lots of different groups, and I want for you as well to talk about the Armenian Meetup that you did as well, right? So Hi NFT put on a pretty good event, right? We got over to their particular, it was kind of like a luncheon of sorts.
Yes.
And I felt like they did a good job of exposing people to the different kind of artists. They actually produced this little booklet that has a bunch of different art from the artists inside of it. And I thought that was really fantastic. We got to meet a lot of different companies that were there representing a whole lot of different projects.
Yeah.
And then aside from that, the other group that was putting on an event was Soul Night. And that one was out in Brooklyn.
Oh,
so they had a bunch of different displays, and that also included a minting event. So they were like minting your own NFT for participation in their future events.
Cool.
That was there. There was also an exhibit from a friend of mine, Don. He's otherwise known as Hwaji, and he does a project that's called GMGN. And this is a dynamic NFT that changes the way that it looks and also the music that's played depending on the time of day.
That's cool.
So I was just super impressed by all of the different Korean projects that were there. There's a ton more to cover, but that's a whole thing unto itself. I would say if we get this video out in the near future, then I would also advise people go check out Korea Blockchain Week. There's a lot that's going to be going on in Seoul in the near future. Fingers crossed, maybe I'll get a plane ticket, get on over there and get to hang out with some folks.
Yeah, I do it.
But yeah, I thought that the Korean presence at NFT NYC was really fantastic. I hope that they keep on showing up and keep showing off all of the really amazing things that are happening in South Korea. I tweeted out during NFT NYC, I think maybe even before, during, and after, that I consider South Korea to always be 5 to 10 years ahead of the US in their adoption of technology on a fairly consistent basis. And I think that that's backed up by some other folks that I chat with. So Phil, who's the CEO of Airfoil Studios and who got me in on the dim sum on my first day in town, he was just over in South Korea, and he'd received NFTs as rewards for having stayed in hotels.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. He stayed in a hotel for a week, and then they gave him an NFT at the end of the week for having stayed in the hotel. And that's just one really easy example, but I'd highly encourage people get over to South Korea and start talking to those companies, because they're looking at this in an entirely different light. And again, it's 5 to 10 years ahead of the curve every single time.
I agree, because you can't even talk to any hotel chain out here about what NFTs are. They're well, what are we gonna do with that?
Yeah.
But that's an interesting thing. I'm glad that they adopt the technology at the rate that they do. I hope we do the same more rapidly. It'd be great.
So yeah, I'd also like to hear as well about the Armenian Meetup. What happened there?
Oh, great. Yeah, I mean, so this is actually the second Armenian Meetup that I attended, because Consensus was here in Austin earlier, right, in June. And there's an Armenian Web3 crypto group that I'm part of. And so a lot of people are part of that network, and they attend the various events, and I met some here. But in NFT NYC, I actually randomly stumbled upon them when I was at the Radio City Music Hall series of talks, and I was waiting in line to get in. They were walking out, and then it's like a radar. We were are you Armenian? Yeah, and we started talking, and we ended up knowing a lot of the same folks. But we got to connecting, and they're doing some really cool things with the technology. They're involved in a lot of Unreal Engine style technology that they utilize in various ways. But it was great, because I bonded with them a lot on various levels, whether it's technology, culture, whatnot. But they're working on a lot of cool projects, and it was good to see the extent of the reach of Web3 in the global space overall. There was a bunch of different things that we sort of attended together, and experiences that we've had. The Goblin Town event was kind of what I was there with, the exchange that we talked about earlier. And so I think, it came a surprising new both work relationship and friendship that could come out of it, and who knows what kind of great collaborations that can happen out of that. So that was my little tidbit of running into other crypto Armenians in NFT NYC.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was cool.
I think that there's a lot of value to having folks from different ethnic groups reaching out to one another and then having a presence at these events and being able to like build that network out. You know, obviously there's this connection between, you know, the motherland, so to speak, and then folks who have immigrated or folks who have like second generation immigrants, right? I think that that's part of that kind of connection back, right? And I experienced this in a similar but different way, which is just more to do with like rural Pennsylvania, right? Like I am from middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, and there's like 10,000 people in my hometown and like 500 people in my parents' hometown, and yet when you find people who are online and doing crypto things and they're from your home, it really just strikes you differently, right? And it's one of the things I really appreciate about this technology is that it allows for you to have that connection and to be able to build together without limitation, right? Like it doesn't matter about the fact that you live in Austin, Texas, and everybody else is like living on the whole other side of the planet, right? You can still work together and build great things together and share in the value, right? And that's all facilitated by this technology that it just wouldn't be the same if like you're setting up a random website or setting up a Shopify site or whatever else. Like you, like the way that you would structure that relationship, it would be completely different.
Be purely transactional. And I can actually say from experience, having worked with developers across the world, setting up Shopify sites and doing different things like that, that it never felt connected in that same manner. As purely transactional type of, and nothing bad with that. It's just the way it is. And here we were just so excited and passionate about this technology. Never talked about like, I'll pay you for this, you'll pay me. It's like, what can we do? How can we collaborate? What can we build? It was more of like children playing and cool things we can get done. And it's just inherent within the space. And I agree, because I've experienced both sides of that, what you just said.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think the only other thing I wanted to kind of call out was a little bit of the sticker game.
Yeah.
So I have a handful of stickers to show off, and some of them are like the better examples. So of course, Rare Pizzas and the Skulls, they all did this like white outline bit. Pinata also did this as well. They all had like the white outline style to their stickers. For the folks who have done their stickers like this, notice that it's not a square cut and it's not a circle cut. Like this is something that I call out as like kind of like your like A grade kind of stickers. And I call this out in particular because there's a lot of people that are like, when they're in marketing, they don't know what to do. And so they would need to like make a sticker quickly, and they tend to make more like square ones, and I feel like they fall short, or the circular ones really fall short. And I'm like, just take the time and make it, you know, have an outline to it, you know. Yeah, get a die cut. It just makes such a difference. There's only one notable exception, which is the Godzilla by Topps. So Topps, if you know like the baseball cards and all that stuff. So yeah, this Rage Across Time Godzilla, like it's rectangular, but I think it worked out well because of the art and because of the way that it's meant to be displayed. It's almost like a bumper sticker. So I felt like that actually worked out really well. But it seems like such a trivial topic, but like the reason why I bring it up is because it's really the difference between somebody taking your project seriously or somebody just like maybe casually glancing at it and then like throwing it away. I bothered to bring back the die cut stickers. I didn't bother with a whole lot of the others, you know, and it's one of those things that in the Burning Man community, they talk about the difference between you know, real material and moop. Moop is matter out of place, and I love that term. I think that's the right way to think about it. It's like these are atoms, but those atoms don't belong here. They don't really belong anywhere. They should not have been organized that way in the first place. And if you think about the energy in atoms and the wastefulness that occurs when you create moop, then it should cause you to pause and think differently and be like, well, maybe we really shouldn't be creating moop. why is this relevant to Web3 is because we have the chance, like this table is covered in stuff, right? And most of it I would not consider Moop. I would actually consider it like decent swag and like nice reminders of this time that existed, right? I call it out because I think there is absolutely this chance that as Web3 picks up and as it's trying to like gain its space in the world, it could run away and generate a ton of Moop. Yeah. And maybe if we can put out a little bit of a warning ahead of time and say like, look, if you're otherwise going to spend a couple $1,000s on Moop, maybe like airdrop an NFT instead, you know, give people an alternative that's like not Moop. Yeah. I think that we can help these folks to like think differently about how to advertise their project, how to get the word out, and to not create waste.
Yeah. Minimize the exhaust, if you will, that gets put out when you know any sort of machine, quote unquote, it is working. Yeah, that's making me be more efficient. Essentially, is what it is. I like that a lot.
Yeah,
it's a great point. It's a very good point. Yeah, I have nothing more to add because it's just perfectly said. I love it. That's spot on.
Right on. I'm tempted to kind of like scroll through and talk about like some of the other photos and whatnot that I have in here, about like the necklaces that had the RFCs or what is it?
NFC chips.
Yeah, the NFC chips. I'm tempted to do that. I'm tempted to talk about a few other things. Oh, I do literally have the photo of you and the mutant cat.
Nice.
You have it actually. You posted it in channel.
On screen now.
Yes. So yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit about that, like, you know, that shoe. Why is it that you got so into the sneaker?
So I'm a huge, and I'm not the only one obviously, but I'm a huge sneaker person, especially the Jordans.
Yeah.
And I like uniqueness. I like character. I like things that kind of like stand out.
Yeah.
Kind of be loud, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw these, so these sneakers are a generative sneaker, if you will, of different elements of the actual mutant cat's NFT traits. And so there are 3 different variations of the sneaker. Each one has a certain inspiration. And one of them was like a mutant generative sneaker of all the different traits. And so I thought that was beautiful because you're taking this digital piece of art that you love and you're combining it with a physical item, which is a huge sort of culture around, has a huge culture around it from people. And so you're combining 2 things that you love. But when I saw this, I just immediately just got excited like a kid in a candy store because I love sneakers. I'm passionate about Web3 and what the technology can do. And I just got excited. So honestly, short of, I think it being a marriage of the 2 things that to me are important, it was just very cool to see that thing in life, in real life, and see it be unique. And it's like the only one of its kind out there.
Yeah, totally.
That sort of collectibleness of it.
Yeah.
And so there was just a lot of the right stuff that came together, and it just sparked this excitement in me. Nice. And I just realized that I have like little cat ears behind my head, foreshadowing my membership to this DAO. But that was funny. I'm literally doing cat ears to myself.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's sort of what triggered my excitement, and I'm looking forward to having those shoes one day.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there is something to that. Personally, I'll be looking forward to because we're in Texas, looking forward to when we have belt buckles.
That would be cool.
You know, it's like if there can be sneakerheads, there's got to be buckleheads out there.
Oh yeah, buckle.
And
as long as they're not knuckleheads, I mean, dad jokes, baby.
Yes. Yeah. But no, I totally dig what you're talking about in terms of like this unique form of expression and how important that is. Yeah. And again, bridging from the digital to the physical world, I think that makes such a difference. You know, that why would we not want to be unique in our expression? You know, we're all individual humans.
I think it's, as we sort of progress in this technology, there's going to be a mesh or merge between the digital and the physical world, and the more that comes together, I mean, we're already seeing it happening. Obviously, it's nothing foreshadowing, but the more that comes together, we're going to see more unique expressionism and more experiences to take part in that are going to be beyond what we can imagine. And there's a beauty to that, and this is that forefront. We're paving the way, so to speak, in that direction now, and it's exciting to think about. And the shoe is one embodiment of that early stage. Like I said earlier, the PFPs are an experiment with smart contract technology. This is the experiment of sort of meshing the digital and physical world together. How do we do that? How do we be more connected? Because, not to get on tangents, but right now when we communicate with each other in the digital space, there is this level of there's a quote unquote wall, so to speak. There's a lack of humanness. So how do we bridge that? How do we become more viscerally connected when we communicate with each other? And I think this is the early stages of that. And the pandemic kind of propelled us in that direction, because we were forced into this virtual working environment. And video collaboration is one thing, but how do we make that more of a visceral experience so that we can have this feeling that we're having right now sitting across each other? Because there's a difference there, and I've always noticed that you feel different when you speak to somebody face to face. So how do we sort of replicate that into the digital physical space as we progress? But I digress.
No, I very much agree with you, and I think that it's a thing to keep on hammering on, because you and I especially, we live so much of our working lives in an ephemeral space, right? I mean, you go from day in to day out, and it's the same kind of windows and screens, and then what's the tangible sense of progress, right? It's a really questionable thing, and it's something that I really appreciate, is for us to regularly return to a series of thoughts about the aesthetic human experience and why that matters quite so much. For me, it was absolutely just kind of drilled into my head with the Illuminati party that occurred, that just how much the human aesthetic experience matters, and it is really the reason why we exist. And so I think the more that we can kind of circle back to that, the better. And so, I'm super happy to see just how much, for example, those sneakers had an effect on you and drew you right to that table. It was like a magnet. It was really amazing. I hope that we continue to think and push in that direction of enhancing the aesthetic human experience while we're pushing in this ephemeral space.
Agreed. And that would be very important in, I think, the next phase of our sort of digital or web development to guide us as a species, I think, in the right direction in our place on the web. So I really hope that we as a whole society can execute on that with Web3 properly. For sure.
Are there any other thoughts or recollections? We've been going at this for an hour. So well, I think we could talk about this all day long, but I'm curious about if there's anything else that really stands out for you.
The Goblin Town burgers were simple, but delicious. The meat was so good, and it was just
indeed, I have the photo.
You had oh my god, such a great burger.
More than one. Some of my friends were eating 5 of those, and I'm really amazed they didn't have problems afterwards.
I had 2 at one after another, but could have had more, but I stopped myself.
Too funny.
I think that, and just my takeaway in general with this is a trend. I don't want to call it a trend, but what I at least noticed, what stood out to me, was that there's a lot of cool people doing cool things that are meaningful to them. And I think those will be what will pave the way for this space. But there was also a lot of brands or companies or people doing things that I feel like they were just doing it just to be there and say, oh, look, I'm doing this.
Right.
And whether it was intentional or not, there just lacked a sort of, I don't want to say value, but a sort of a realness or connection that you can feel with that. And there was nothing on them. It was just, it didn't seem like it was an authentic case of something that's being done for it to be truly inspirational in this space. It was just oh, I'm doing this. And that's fine. That's fine. You can do that, but there is going to be, I think, by next year, different landscape at NFT NYC
Yeah.
of who's there and what kind of projects and companies are there, and that's fine. That's the normal evolution of technology. So I'm excited for that. Is what I'd like to see for next year.
Nice.
Or take away from myself at least.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't have much else to say other than major thank you to Consensus for allowing me to hop on a panel while I was in town. I thought that was a really great talk, and I'll try and find the link to it and maybe get it added to this one so you can kind of see what that was all about. We were talking about NFTs, crypto in general, the future of humanity. I was on a panel with there was this one representative from Microsoft, and I gave him a nudge to bring back the Zune and turn it into an NFT wallet. and he said, well, maybe the Surface, they might be able to use the Surface. But yeah, I thought that it was an overall good event. I was really happy for it and really thankful for the Consensus folks to let me tag along. That was really cool. The only other thing I was going to say is if you would like for me to review your swag and to see whether or not it is swag or moop, then please send it to Alex Wykoff, care of Wursta on East 7th Street. I'm sure that we'll kind of drop a little box with the address, and then you can mail it on in. And in the future, I'll be super happy to review your materials and talk up your project, or let you know that it's moop and you shouldn't be making any more of it.